In this video, it's another Q&A session. We have some fantastic questions from friend of the channel, Mr. Matthew Murr, that we're going to dive into up next. Welcome aboard to another episode of Orange Grove 55. I brought my good friend, collaborator, producer Dre, host of Freshly Squeezed, Mr. Vash Sky. How are you doing today, sir?
Hey, doing pretty good. You know, some interesting questions that we've gotten from one of our viewers, and I cannot wait to answer some of them. But hey, if you want to send questions to me, you can do that at Vash Sky right down there, just like it's spelled. You can go to that social media website for the most robust discussion, right? Especially right now. Yeah, see, robust discussion, right? It's a very interesting time, that's for sure. So keep the questions coming. And if you want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now, Orange Grove 55 at Freshly Squeezed, your source for juice, news, and info, squeezed fresh right from the Grove. Let's see. This one's very an unusual background, so we'll go with it.
The dark side is in our nature. Surrender to it.
There you go. So yeah, it's pretty cool. So yeah, there you go.
Let's go. And I just want to also say thank you to everybody that participated over the weekend in our live streams. That was so much fun, and we will be doing a lot more of those going forward. That was a really good time. So everybody that was able to check that out and participate, just want to send a big thank you. That was really fun.
Oh, it was awesome, and I think we got some pretty good reception. I mean, everybody really enjoyed them too. So hey, we love putting them on, and I can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's dive into some of these questions here.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so this is friend of the channel, Matthew Murr, and Matthew's asking. He said he has quite a few questions this time, so we're gonna go through. He's got 4 of them.
Sure.
So the first question: do you think the company would be in a much better state if Walt Disney was still alive after 1966, or if Frank Wells didn't die in 1994? Because some could argue that their respective deaths flung the company into chaos. What are your overall thoughts on that, Vash? This is some pretty deep stuff. This is interesting.
Yeah, it is some pretty deep stuff, because I guess it depends on what you classify as like success for the company. Like, right. Monetarily, I think the company it languished there for a while when Walt died, obviously. When Michael Eisner came in, I mean, the company saw new heights that it had never experienced before. So, I mean, one could say that financially, things might have worked out better because, well, Walt Disney was going to see Epcot through. I mean, that's just no question about that. And the financial situation with the company at that time, had that actually happened, I mean, one could argue that maybe wasn't the most profitable course for the company at that time. You could also say that Walt could have wheeled and dealed and made some things happen that maybe didn't happen without him. Epcot being one of them, obviously, but what about the Mineral King project? What could have happened there? It's an interesting story there. Frank Wells, I think is easier to say. I think the company would have done much better had Frank Wells still been alive. Had he lived, I think the company would have been much better off. It would have been much more financially successful, and probably would have gone through with the Disney decade and a couple of other things. I think that the company started to decline without his presence there. So I think that answer is much more straightforward. But Walt Disney is a very interesting one because the trajectory of the company would have been much different.
Yeah. This is a fascinating question. And it's fascinating. It kind of reminds me a lot of like Back to the Future, when Doc would tell Marty, don't talk to anybody, don't do anything that's going to affect the future. You're gonna mess up the timeline, kind of stuff, right?
Yeah,
Classic
exactly.
movie.
There you go.
Great Scott! You know, the classic movie time travel kind of trope, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where that's kind of my perspective on it. And here's the thing. Sometimes, and it really does suck when you're kind of living it, like those downtimes, you know? Sometimes those downtimes, though, are necessary to have the really good times.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? And like we wouldn't have had Frank Wells if we didn't have the downturn prior to him coming in, right? So let's just say that like Walt Disney didn't die. Well, you know, I mean, Walt Disney probably would have been alive then in the 80s. You know, it's not unusual for someone to live to 80, 85 years old. He probably would have still been alive, and he probably wouldn't have brought Frank Wells on. Sure. So you wouldn't even have had Frank Wells if not for the fact that Walt passed in 1966 and the fact that the company started to decline in the 70s and 80s. Mm-hmm. So you kind of would have messed up that whole timeline, right? Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at here with this. I don't know. Like, look, I agree that like if he would have survived, the movies and the parks would have went on. Like the Renaissance era would have lasted longer. We probably would have got more Indiana Jones adventure kind of attractions. Mm-hmm. But I think all those downturns, those ebbs and flows are kind of necessary in the long run. Even California Adventure, look, if we didn't have the cheap version 1.0 with Pressler, then we wouldn't have gotten Buena Vista Street. We wouldn't have ever gotten Cars Land. So it's weird. It's this like weird kind of yin and yang where the negative sort of is like kind of feeds on the good, and they're kind of like dependent on each other in a way. I don't know. It's kind of strange, but I don't know. That whole Renaissance era probably wouldn't have happened because look, if you remember too, Walt Disney was kind of checked out when it came to animation.
He really was.
You know, come late 60s, he was all in on the parks. And I think it was Tony Baxter who said, like, after Epcot, Walt Disney probably would have like tried to colonize Mars or something. Like, he was, he was all focused on other things, and you wouldn't have gotten. And look, Walt Disney was brilliant. There's no disrespect to Walt Disney. I love the man, but you wouldn't have got the quality, I think, of the animated films we got with Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Lion King, if Walt Disney was still around, because he was really coasting with animation in those later years. So it's weird. Everything kind of connects, and it really is. Sometimes the rock bottom is sort of necessary to even reach higher heights. Sometimes. Not always, but sometimes,
Sometimes it happens, Don Bluth goes out, he takes a bunch of animators with him, and he becomes the main competition for Disney for a period of time that kicks off the Renaissance period, right? And makes Disney competitive once again at the box office, because they have to be at that point. When Frank Wells actually passes away, Jeffrey Katzenberg leaves, starts up DreamWorks, and that really gives rise to the Pixar kind of war between those two companies. And that competition, that friction that's created from that, birthed some of the best animated films that we've ever seen. Sometimes even bad things kind of happen for a reason, right? That's kind of the old saying, but it really does. The trajectory of the company at certain key points in history, in certain instances, sometimes what's birthed out of that, we can't imagine living without. I mean, it's does Walt Disney World, take on the same form, with if Walt had lived? Probably not. And some of the people associate certain memories with Walt Disney World and its current incarnation. Maybe that wouldn't have happened had Walt actually lived on. So it's a tricky thing. Obviously, we don't want these people to die. That's what I'm saying. But sometimes these things happen, and sometimes good can still happen even with these tragic events.
Yeah, 100%. And really one of the earliest examples of how a failure can lead to like monumental success would be Oswald. I mean, at the time, Walt Disney was extremely depressed and bummed out. He lost Oswald to Universal, right? Mm-hmm. And at that time, Walt Disney was probably like, man, like shit, like I lost his character that I put my heart and soul into, and we were doing well, and then I lost him, right? But had that rock bottom not have hit, well, you wouldn't have got even the better character, which is Mickey Mouse, and you wouldn't have had any of this if not for the failure, really, of Oswald, right?
Yeah, it all started with a mouse.
It all started with a mouse, and it's kind of weird how this stuff kind of plays on each other. So Matthew, like, to kind of like wrap it up, I mean, it did fling the company into some chaos. It did create some really bad, dark times for the Magic Kingdom, but sometimes you need those to come out of it and come out stronger.
Walt even said sometimes the best thing for you is kicking the pants. I mean, and sometimes that's true. It's we can't always control what happens to us. It's really how we react to things, right? And for the company at key points in history, you can name 20 of them right off the tip of your tongue there. Sometimes that really end up working in the company's favor, or at least the fans' favor, right? We got the benefit of some great stuff when that happens. So you just never know.
You never know. So number 2 is from Matthew's list. Number 2 is, what's your opinion on Disney making sequels? Some people might argue that it goes against Walt's vision of never repeating himself. But I think Disney should backtrack on that if there's a decent story to tell. Cinderella, A Twist in Time. I think you mentioned that in the last video, Matthew. Cinderella, A Twist in Time was one of the only ones that added to the overall Cinderella story. So Dre, what are your thoughts on Disney making sequels overall?
I'm not purely against it. Look, I think Walt, everybody says, oh, Walt didn't like the sequels. And yes, he did, but a lot of people just kind of instinctively attribute that to, well, he just didn't like, continuing on these stories or adding to them and via the sequel route or whatever. Honestly, it really just goes to, and a lot of people don't attribute it this way, but if you look at Walt Disney's history, it's really more about he's just on to do the next thing. It's he kind of looks at it as been there, done that. I kind of look at it like a Christopher Nolan almost, right? Christopher Nolan doesn't make sequels to almost anything now. Obviously, he has his famous sequels with the Dark Knight trilogy, right? But outside of that, he's on the next thing. He's not gonna add on to or revisit works he's already done before. I'm moving on, kind of thing. And that's kind of Walt Disney. It's like, hey, we did sound cartoons. Let's do an animated film, which is a huge leap, right? We did an animated film. Let's do like this kind of, almost musical ensemble film, this kind of very art project with Fantasia and stuff. We did that. Let's go ahead and let's do a theme park, and then, when that becomes an incredible success, and he adds to it, right? It's like, you know what? I've been there, done that. Let's do something else. Let's do, Mineral King. Let's do Epcot, and those things excited him. And so it's not really, a criticism of sequels per se. Obviously, he has the, can't follow pigs with pigs quote there. But it was more about, he was always interested in the next thing because he had conquered so much ground, so to speak.
No, 100%. Walt was very much a forward thinker. He, like you said, Ray, he was always on to the next thing. And you mentioned the great quote from Walt about you can't top pigs with pigs, right? Mm-hmm. And I think for the most part, I think that he wanted to stay away from sequels. He wanted to stay away from kind of retreading things, but he wasn't completely adverse to it. We saw this with the Alice comedies. Yeah, he revisited that character years later with Alice in Wonderland in the 1950s. And we saw it with, I believe, the Three Caballeros and Saludos Amigos are I think, I don't know which one came first, but I think one was a sequel to the other, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that. But I think
they're related.
Yeah, they're connected. I think he was open to it, but I think he preferred to pioneer new things, tread new territory, move forward, and that was really the trajectory that he was on,
Yeah.
But we do live in a different day now. We do live in this kind of franchise kind of world. And it's interesting, if Walt was still alive, would he have embraced that? Would he have embraced that sequel kind of trend? I don't know. I really don't.
I bring it up because I think if it was to Matthew's point, if it was a good enough story, I think he would be open to the idea of continuing on and doing a number 2 or even a number 3, with some of his films. But it had to be a really strong story, and it had to be something that piqued his interest. Otherwise, he wouldn't look in that way. And so, just to kind of answer Matthew's point here, really it's all about, and he alludes to it himself, got to find a story that really hooks. Not just that would hook the audience, but would hook the creator as well. And in Walt's specific case, if he was on board, if he was really excited about it, then I would say it would move forward. And so when I look at the current day, it really has to be something that the creators are both passionate about, and something that the audience actually wants to see.
Yeah. And for me personally, I don't mind sequels per se, but there is a little bit of a cheapness to them. But it depends on how it's done. Like for example, Star Wars and Harry Potter. I think they handle it kind of perfect, where they're a series of films, but they're like one big story, and each film is like a chapter of that bigger story, right? I think that's really cool. I think that's a cool storytelling device to have in your pocket to utilize, right?
Yeah.
The only time I'm kind of not really too fond of sequels is when they feel very just sort of like tacked on. Like, I loved Frozen, but then it was like, okay, that movie did well, so now we're gonna do Frozen 2, right? There was obviously there was no overarching story when they created the first movie. They're just gonna tack it on and call it Frozen 2. Land Before Time did this a lot. They had Land Before Time 2, 3, 4. They went on forever. That's kind of when it feels cheap to me. But when a studio goes into it knowing they have, hey, we have a 7-movie arc that we want to accomplish, right? And each film is a chapter, like Harry Potter, things like that. I'm open for that. But when they just kind of tack them on because the last one did really well, it starts to feel a little cheap. It starts to feel a little cheap,
A lot of these are self-contained stories, It's like, hey, we as creators who went into it, we kind of put everything that we wanted to put into the first one. So, the Wachowskis famously, were very much like, oh man, The Matrix was so, it was so successful. Going back into this well is extremely difficult because we did everything we wanted to do with the first one, and you could kind of see how they were stretching for some material there for number 2 and 3, and it, all that kind of stuff. Now, again, some people like that trilogy a lot, but it's sometimes you're just reaching. Sometimes it's just the studio going, hey, we want to see a sequel to this because we think we can turn this into a franchise. But as creators, it's like are we necessarily passionate about this? Can we necessarily do it again? It's the dichotomy of the sequel. Steven Spielberg famously is adverse to sequels because of this kind of thing. It's tough. It really is. I think if you have a franchise that lends itself to sequels, Harry Potter, like you said, Star Wars, or even like Indiana Jones, you just throw them in any adventure and be fully immersed in that, right? I think good go, But if you're reaching, if it was a self-contained story at one point, maybe it should remain that way. I agree with you, OG. It really is about execution.
100%. And the number 3 question from Mr. Matthew Murr is, what would you personally define as the best balance between Walt's way of doing things and Eisner and Iger in terms of running the parks, i.e. pricing of the parks, the range of attractions and amenities at the Disney resorts, thinking up original themes and stories or relying on existing ones? This is like a massively loaded question, but go ahead, Vash. What are your overall thoughts on like what he's asking here is what's the best balance between the price points, IP attractions compared to original attractions? How do you balance the financials and all of this together? You're making quality stuff, but you got to make money too. How are all these factors? How do you balance that in just the right way?
Oh boy, this is a really interesting one. Oh man, well, I'm fond of Walt's methodology where it was just like, okay, like, all right, I understand we don't completely own Disneyland. Like, we have a lot of debt that we have to actually pay back, and we don't own, like, I don't even think they had a majority interest at some points when it came to Disneyland. But we're still going to invest all that we can in it, right? We're just gonna take all the cash that we're making, just invest it right back in, and freaks out Roy because it's like, we have to turn like a revenue, like we have to turn a profit, we have to like buy this thing back, and it's like nonsense. We had to invest in the parks, right? I like that. It's risky though, like super risky. I think the early Eisner era was pretty good in terms of balance, right? You had some original attractions, but you also had, some pretty good IP ones that got people in the door, right? There was a constant slate of investment, and while it was expensive, it generally was kind of grafted out really well, right? I mean, the later Eisner years got a little lean, right? It got a little cheap.
Yep.
Iger, you got some great ones, but we had to wait for them, right? I think the early Eisner era, you had some mix of some original attractions, IP attractions on a nice regular recurrent schedule. Maybe the pricing was a little aggressive in the later Eisner years.
Yeah.
But I think those early Eisner years, I think that was the best mix of kind of all of us. What do you think about that?
100%. I'm completely on the same page with you with that. I think that in terms of the parks, the first decade for Michael Eisner's era was near flawless. He managed to really, him and Frank Wells managed to invest enough where you were getting really quality stuff and stuff that was really kind of innovative at the time. Like to have an outside IP like Indiana Jones in a Disney park.
Very controversial.
Mm-hmm. Very controversial back then. And Star Tours, again, outside IP at the time, very controversial. And even Captain EO, bringing in Michael Jackson and doing that whole thing. All this stuff was kind of outside the box at the time,
Absolutely was.
Yeah, and they spent a huge amount of money. I think, what was it, Francis Ford Coppola did Captain EO, and there was like no expense.
It was the most expensive film per minute ever at the time that it came out. I mean, it was extremely expensive. Yeah, it took some big risks. They
took some big risks, and then upon making those risks, they made their money back in spades. And it was really just everyone was kind of happy, right? The fans were happy. Hey, we're getting some kick-ass stuff. We got Indiana Jones, Star Tours, Captain EO. We're doing great.
Splash Mountain.
The bean counters were happy. We're making money hand over fist. So it was that perfect balance. Everyone's happy. We're all good,
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. And even in animation, it was kind of the same thing. It was kind of like that perfect balance in the early Eisner years of like, okay, we're going to respect the history. We're going to do animated films in the same vein that Walt did them in, where like a Beauty and the Beast can sit next to a Cinderella and it feels cohesive. Like these they're cut from the same cloth, right?
It does.
But yet Beauty and the Beast is still fresh enough for modern audiences. It was like that perfect mix, right?
Right.
And they just struck the right tone, like over and over again, whether it be films, whether it be attractions. And then, unfortunately, like we talked about earlier, Frank Wells passed away. Then everything changed dramatically. But that first decade of Eisner, that's like a master class on how to run Disney and run it like just balancing it so perfectly, you know?
Right. And honestly, like, Eisner and Frank Wells, they were both very ambitious, right? They really wanted to kind of supercharge the entire company by, just a slate of different product. The live action stuff, the Bette Midler stuff, I could live without, but everything else, like the animation, the theme parks. I mean, even Tony Baxter talks about this. He's just like, man, when Eisner and Frank Wells were together, man, I mean, it's just, you can go to him and ask him for anything, and they're like, "Yeah, let's do it," And he talks about how great of a process that actually was back at that time period. It really speaks to how profound Frank Wells' passing was, and what effect that had on not just the trajectory of the company, but with certain individuals, certain decision makers, and how they felt about certain things going forward. I mean, the Disney decade, oh man, you just think about what that could have been, and it was just cut short, and it was really unfortunate. It's interesting. So Matthew, he said something back in our live stream, and I wasn't able to get to it, but he was suggesting that the Paris issues happened in Frank Wells, when Frank Wells was alive, and he was calling into question maybe Frank Wells, maybe I mean, something bad happened on his watch, and maybe maybe he wasn't perfect, and that's true, but you have to understand about Frank Wells, he was the one that actually negotiated with the bankers to keep Disneyland Paris open. Wow. And actually get it on a financial trajectory to make a profit at some point. Keep it in kind of the black rather than the deep red, to try and finance their way out of it. He was the one that negotiated that deal, and really he kept that dream alive in terms of Disneyland Paris. So yes, these bad things did happen while he was alive, but he was so influential. Oh yeah. In keeping that park alive. I mean, he really was, and it was out of that hard negotiation period with the banks in France that he was like, you know what, that was tough. I'm gonna go on a weekend trip, and I'm gonna go skiing in the mountains there. I'll be right back, and that's what happened there. That's where he takes that helicopter ride, and the rest is history. But Frank Wells, I mean, he dedicated himself to the company to the very end. Yep. So don't go disparaging him.
No.
He was good stuff.
No, he was great stuff, and he's got his name on the Frank G. Wells building over at the studio. Mm-hmm. And
Wells Expedition Matterhorn.
Yep, much deserved. Frank Wells is. You want to talk about like Disney Legends? It's so funny because D23 hands these Disney Legends awards out not like candy. And I know a lot of people are going to push back on me like, oh, nah, they do. In my opinion, and this is all subjective, but like when you say someone's a Disney legend, I think it takes more than just being a voice of a character in a film one time. And that seems to be the only metric right now to get a legend award. When I think Disney legend, I think Frank Wells. I think the Sherman Brothers. The Nine Old Men, absolutely. Right? Tony Baxter, George Lucas, these are legends, I'm sorry, some of these, and I'm not going to get into the details on which ones I don't think deserve it or not. I don't want to disparage anybody, but
I get you.
But for the most part, the Disney Legends Awards are handed out like candy now. They become the Disney Oscars.
Some of those are relationships too, you can just, it's a little bit of, look, listen, even Tony Baxter said, hey, Disney getting a Disney Legends Award was one thing. Getting a window on Main Street was something else. He was much prouder about that. So that tells you all you need to know. Yeah.
As he should be. We love Tony.
Love him.
So Matthew Murr, his fourth and final question.
Cool.
What would you define as the absolute most ideal path for the film division, i.e. how complex or simplistic the characters and stories should feel, what genre of music should be used, and how conservative or liberal it should be? Boy, Matthew, you really go in with these deep questions, man. They're loaded. They're packed.
It's wild.
It's wild, man. Here's the thing. This is a tough one, Matthew, because every film is different. You can't really like when you say how complex, how simplistic, you're saying like what kind of genre of music. Look, when it comes to Walt Disney Animation, they shouldn't be using pop songs. I think Walt Disney Animation Studios should be the timeless storybook studio. I've always stood by that. I do not like, and I'm going to get a lot of heat for this, but this is how I feel. I do not like films like Wreck-It Ralph, which are very modern.
Yeah.
Coming out of that studio. Yeah. This should be a more timeless kind of storybook studio. Right. Now, I'm not adverse though to making Wreck-It Ralph kinds of movies, just don't have them be Walt Disney Animation. I think the more modern takes on stuff should be done with Pixar. That's all. I think if you're going to have two studios, and Walt Disney and Pixar, they should release very different kinds of stuff. So you have the storybook studio with Disney, you have the more modern kind of take on things with Pixar, and I think that's kind of the right balance for that. So like Matthew, like it just depends what studio is releasing it. It depends on what kind of movie it is. Obviously, I love hip hop. I am a big rap person, but if you're going to make a fairy tale animated film, I don't want like Lil Wayne doing the soundtrack. Right? like there's just certain things that just don't work, and it just depends on the material. So it's really hard to kind of nail it down into like a definitive answer because there really isn't one. Every movie, every franchise, even every studio requires and demands a different approach. But what do you think, Dre?
The other difficult thing about this is that times change. And so what was maybe applicable in the past may not be applicable now. So that's kind of the other thing. It's kind of that kind of what is it? It's a changing goalpost. It shifts, and so it's hard to say like a hard answer on this kind of question because audience tastes do change. But generally, I agree with you, OG. It's like, listen, Disney animation should be the classics. It should be these things that are evergreen, that kind of last forever, that don't necessarily place themselves in any one time period, but feel like they could have come out in any time period and it would all kind of fit, right? Yeah, Cinderella is of the time, but you could put that on to a child now, and they don't know, might not know the difference, but still be immersed as any other of Disney's animated classics, whether that be even Moana, or Sleeping Beauty or whatever. So I do agree with that. Less of the Wreck-It Ralphs, more of the Cinderellas, in my personal view. As far as simplicity, complexity, you can have a complex kind of, narrative and complex characters and so forth, but in terms of animated films, if we're going to be speaking about those, you can kind of start to lose your audience real fast if you get too complex, if you get too mired in it. Look, I like a heady film. I really do. Like, I like the Tenets, right? I like those kind of films, but it's tough. That doesn't speak to maybe a broader audience. Right. And you should always keep a broader audience in mind, especially when it comes to Disney product, because you're looking at those kind of 4-quadrant films. So you kind of have to do that balancing act. You don't want to talk down to your audience necessarily, but you want to keep them hanging on as well. You don't want to lose them. So it's one of those things.
No, 100%. I think about as complex that animation should really go would be kind of like the Star Wars saga. Like that kind of story could be the absolute like most complex you could take animation.
Yeah.
I wouldn't try to get any more heady than that with animation. You want to keep it as simplistic kind of as possible,
Yeah.
Just the real kind of like core kind of storytelling. Yeah, you don't want to get too in the weeds with stuff. And then he goes on to say, how conservative or liberal should it be? I don't know, man. Matthew, in terms of that, I think that it's time to kind of like, I'm just tired of the culture war. I'll be real, man. I'm tired of it, and I just want them to make good. I just want them to make good content, and I don't want it to be shoehorned and all like manufactured and like, you know, with a quota. I just want it to be good content. That's it. And if it falls under liberal, if it falls under conservative, I don't care. Just make good content. That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah. It's all anybody really wants, really. Just, you know, yeah, I mean, you could have like the, you know, as Walt Disney himself would say, we were just reading quotes.
Oh,
sorry.
Sorry about that. I hit the wrong button. I'm
You're
so
fine.
sorry.
You're fine. You're fine. You're fine.
Your last word was as Walt Disney was saying.
So remember, we were OG. You had sent to me privately some Walt quotes that, you know, don't get circled around all that much, you know. And he talked about what should be featured and what shouldn't be, right? And he called it the classic American liberalisms, right? And I think when you think about those things, like, hey, you know what, you know, don't be discriminatory towards people, right? You know, accept people for who they are, and you know, there are some classic liberalisms that pretty much all of America can agree on, kind of thing. Stick to that, you know. It's like I would approach that like I would approach the 4-quadrant aspect of films, right? Yep. I mean, you know, you want to really reach to the broadest demographic you can, and so whatever those values might be at the time for the broadest audience, stick with that as well. That's kind of how I would put that. But I agree with you. I mean, stop with this culture war stuff. Stop with this. You know, we're gonna you know, inject this or that into it. I mean, just you got to really get back to great story, great characters, and something that people can really sink their teeth into and not have to feel like, ooh, you know, should I be showing my kid this? Should I be, you know, those kind of questions shouldn't be brought in. And once you get to that point where they are, maybe you're going a little bit too far. But that's just me.
Yeah, no, 100%. And you can include everybody. Like Walt Disney was very, Pinocchio, right? Yeah. The legendary Disney song, "When You Wish Upon a Star," doesn't matter who you are, you know, and there's these messages of like togetherness from him, even back then, like even back in the 40s, right? And that's the kind of thing that I think that's the kind of right tone Disney should set right now. I think everyone's on board with that, you know, that togetherness, that everybody, right? But when you start to like you said, Ray, like you start to, it feels like kind of shoehorn, and there's like a quota, and there's like this and that, and you're like, it just, it gets a little too much, and people can see through it, and it just looks kind of whatever, you know.
I agree. Look, listen, think about Small World, right? That. Honestly, for the time that attraction was done, I mean, you know, Richard Sherman talks about it, and it's like, man, you know, that was during the Cold War. You know, people were genuinely worried about nuclear war, and people and two huge nuclear powers go into conflict, and Small World was kind of a you know, a prayer for peace kind of thing, right? That's about as controversial as I personally want, you know, when it comes to the culture and everything like that. Because Small World was kind of a statement, right. But it, you know, it I mean, you could kind of say it beat you over the head with, but it was something that everybody kind of agreed upon too. Right. So that kind of thing. Exactly.
And even Walt's original opening day speech, we talked about it with the Main Street Electrical Parade.
Yeah.
The new opening, you know, to all who come to this happy place. It's very much in line with kind of like that same kind of like when you wish upon a star, doesn't matter who you are kind of mentality of like, we're everybody's included. We you know, everyone's welcome, but you don't get too in the weeds with the culture war stuff and get all, you know, bogged down. And so, yeah, that's kind of the route they should definitely go in. But Matthew, man, thank you so much for the support, dude. You've been a friend of the channel for a long time, man. And you know, we really do appreciate it. And you had some fantastic questions. Honestly, man, you had me really thinking, because like some of these questions were not easy.
No, I was looking at them, I was going, oh man, like I got to really think about this, you know.
They were tough. They were tough.
Yeah. So some people just want to know our favorite churro,
right? Yeah, exactly.
It's like these ones were pretty much more complex than that. But I do appreciate the good conversation. Yes. I mean, you know, get the old noggin thinking. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Dre, if you could let everybody at home know where they could find you on social media, sir.
Well, best place to find me is going to be, best place to interact with me anyway is going to be on Twitter at VashSky. It's right down there, just like it's spelled. Go there for the robust discussion. You can do that. Yeah, exactly, right. It's been very interesting on the platform as of recently, not just for the subject matter, but for the platform itself. So, if you want to dive into those waters, go ahead, and I'll go ahead and DM you back. But if you want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now, Orange Go 45 at Freshly Squeezed, your source for juicy news and info squeezed fresh right from the Grove.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Dre, so much as always for coming on, brother. And thank everybody for watching today. Comment down below with all your thoughts on what we discussed today. And a big shout out once again to Matthew Murr for the fantastic questions. Now, if you guys have a question that you want us to answer in a future video or future Q&A, comment down below with the question. We pull from the audience a lot. And you guys provide some of our best content. Like, your questions feed a lot of the best stuff we do. We love that participation. So comment down below with any questions in regard to the parks, film, streaming, doesn't matter. Everything. We do it all. So, but thank you, Dre, and thank you for watching, everybody. And as always, have a wonderful, wonderful day.